world. Welcome to another episode of the Akiona Law Podcast. I am family law attorney, Lani Akiona, and this is a podcast wherein we talk about anything and everything that intersects in the areas of family law, including divorce and collaborative divorce. And today I have with me, my guest is certified divorce lending professional, financial neutral, and in her former life, she was a tax attorney, Mihaella Bayla. Mihaella, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so glad you can be on today. You just have, I met you and I was just blown away about what you're doing now as a certified divorce lending professional. And you've been practicing law for a long time, about 15 years. You're licensed in California, you're licensed in Washington. And the fact that you did tax, you worked in that area of just tax law, and now you're bringing that expertise into a certified divorce lending professional. I'm just so excited to have you on here. And the reason why, folks, is because she's in a very specialized in a neat area that is going to be so helpful for people in the areas of family law, because what she does is she works with divorce attorneys, real estate agents, financial planners, and people going through a divorce to talk about mortgage lending, whether you're going through divorce and you need to talk about refinancing, or you're going to purchase a home. So Mihaella, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Like, how did you get from going through becoming a tax attorney into doing this mortgage lending niche area with people going through divorce?
Yes, Lani, thank you so much. And such a pleasure to be here. It actually happened accidentally and organically. I was, believe it or not, a little bit burnt out on doing tax work. And I was trying to figure out what my next journey will be, because I knew I wanted to sort of pivot. And during this time, my husband, who was a mortgage broker, had the chance to open his own brokerage. And we had worked together in the past, and we really enjoy working together. And he asked me if I'm willing to just take a year off from my law firm and help him launch this company. And my purpose was initially going to be only as a business manager.
Right, because you said you had your own law firm.
I did, yeah, for about 10 years at that point. Right.
How many years at that point?
About 10.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
You took a break.
I took a break for about a year. That was the plan, to go help him launch his business. So initially I was doing the negotiating of contracts, hiring, training, HR, anything that was business related, but not necessarily mortgage related. However, very soon into my 1-year project, the refinance boom hit. And before I knew it, I was helping out with loans. I was licensed because we are trying to keep up with demand. And during this time, I started noticing a pattern. Whenever there was a more complicated case, I was asked to sort of help out, especially when it came to divorces. Okay. And I started seeing this really unfortunate pattern where folks who would have had just a minor change in the way that maybe their divorce decree was written, or maybe the way that their spousal support was awarded, could have kept the house or be able to qualify to purchase a house. And this is what their intention was their whole time. This is what the plan was. And I had to be, my team and I had to be in the unfortunate position to give them the news that unfortunately you do not qualify for a mortgage because XYZ, which I could see was preventable. And the more that I looked into this, the more passionate I felt about it, that it was such a need in the industry, it was such a need to go out and start helping out attorneys and clients going through a divorce with this specialized planning that makes such a difference at the end of the divorce, to make sure that folks can have an affordable and safe place to live.
And when you say specialized planning, just to be clear, you're talking about this specialized mortgage refinancing.
Exactly. So I researched what was available as far as education and licensing, and I found the Divorce Lending Association. They've been around for about 10 years. They offer incredible education, testing, ongoing support, and I decided to join. Thus, I became a certified divorce lending professional, or CDLP. And the planning that I do, I sort of
Yeah,
It's a hybrid.
can we go into that? Because I didn't even know
Yeah,
there's such a thing as a certified divorce lending professional until I met you. So can you explain what exactly that is?
absolutely. If you want to think of the intersection between family law, tax law, financial planning, and then divorce mortgage lending,
I do.
by that, what I mean by, I'm sorry.
Because this is, so you said, so a certified divorce lending professional. Let's think about the intersection of family law, tax law,
Financial planning,
financial planning.
and then some very advanced and limited loan opportunities that are only available to divorcing individuals for a very limited amount of time.
Okay.
So if you think of living in that specific space,
Mm.
it is planning that is really efficient if it's done at the beginning of divorce or during the negotiation process, really before the divorce is finalized.
Okay.
Because then we can really work with the divorce team, think outside of the box, find solutions, and set up these divorcing homeowners to be in a position where they have options, or at least they understand what's doable or not doable, sort of anticipate roadblocks and find solutions to roadblocks before they become a problem.
So as a divorce attorney or as a divorce attorney, as a client going through divorce, I want to tell my clients, meet with you before anything is finalized regarding the home. Meet with me
Absolutely.
first and figure out what your options are.
Absolutely. And it goes into finding out what their goals and needs are.
Okay.
So that's how I start my consultation with clients. I started with, what are your goals? If this was a perfect world and this was a perfect outcome out of your dissolution, what would like to see happen when it comes to the home, either the marital home or your plans after the divorce is done? And so we start with the goals and then we work backwards.
Okay. So
There's a,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, so like, could you give us some examples of, I guess, what are the questions or the hot topics that people going through divorce come to you with?
Absolutely. So there's two parts to that, two answers to that question. And I would love to address both because they're really important. I'm going to start what the hot topics are, and then I'm going to tell you how I address those, meaning my process.
Okay.
The hot topics that I see that I have conversations on a regular daily basis about are assumable loans. Can I assume the current loan? A lot of folks have really great interest rates because they refinanced or they purchased during the time when rates were in the low threes, maybe even the high twos, or perhaps fours. But now what we've seen,
Yeah.
especially at the end of last year and earlier this year, we've seen rates in the sevens. They're starting to really normalize now. We are quoting in the fives again, which is really great. But still, that's a lot higher than, let's say, a 3% interest rate.
Right.
And that makes a huge difference on a person's budget, monthly budget.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really important question to address, whether or not assumable loans are an option. And if they're not, what happens if one party has a limited time to, for example, refinance the mortgage into their name,
Right.
and maybe pay out the departing spouse or just take over the loan. And if they don't do it within a specified amount of time, then they have to sell the house and thus lose the marital home. So what happens in those cases when, for example, one of the spouse who wants to keep the house may not qualify to refinance? Are there options? What do they look like? And how is the departing spouse protected in such a situation? Those are really important topics that we address on a daily basis.
Okay. And that's the assumable loan.
The assumable loans.
Can I, as like, if I'm a wife and I'm divorcing my husband and I want to take over the mortgage, I need to come to you. And first of all, I have to figure out, can I assume this loan? Because we have a 3% interest rate and now the interest rate is at 6%. Here's what I'm making. Can I afford this? So help me walk through this. So assuming I can't assume the loan.
Yes.
What do we do next?
Well, what's important to understand is that there's two types of assumable loans.
Okay.
And when it comes to a divorce,
Mhm.
The great thing is that there is protection for consumers if, let's say, the staying spouse. So you'll be the staying spouse in this case. So Lani gets to keep the house.
That's what it's called, the terminology. I'm the staying spouse.
It's what we are sort
Okay.
of using as a layman's term to
Okay. And then,
differentiate and explain the scenarios to our clients. So there might be a more advanced way to say it, and I think that would be the person assuming the interest, or the assumer in interest. But for my purposes, I'll just say the staying spouse and the
I
departing
like it.
spouse.
I and then you said the other spouse is called the departing spouse.
That's what I refer to them as.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm the staying spouse.
Let's say you are the staying spouse. You have two options as far as assumable loans go. The first option is called a legal assumption, and the second option is called a qualified assumption. And it's important to know the distinction between the two. A legal assumption is when you are awarded a home that has a mortgage attached to it, and you perhaps have both been on the mortgage, but now the departing spouse wants to go on and do something else. So what happens once the lender finds out that there's been a divorce and the other spouse, the departing spouse, has left the residence?
Right.
In a lot of cases, they would sort of accelerate the due on sale clause, except for instances of very limited instances, including divorce, when the Garn-Stain-Germain Act, the Depository Act of 1982, comes into play. And that prevents lenders from accelerating the due on sale clause. And it basically allows the staying spouse, someone like you, to keep the mortgage under the same terms without having to give a financial disclosure and to qualify financially, as long as you make your monthly payments on a regular basis.
Okay.
So that's a legal assumption. And in that case, both spouses stay on the loan. And in a minute, I'll talk about the risks and how to protect the departing spouse from those risks. Let's compare that with a qualified assumption. A qualified assumption is, let's say, Lani, you and your spouse are both on the mortgage, but you are able to apply and receive a qualified assumption, meaning that now the loan is entirely taken out of your former spouse's name. You are the one who's 100% financially responsible. The loan gets transferred into your name alone. And from now on, that is only your loan. You get to keep the same interest rate as before. The term might reset. So if you were perhaps 3 years into a 30-year term, now you're restarting that 30-year term.
Yeah.
Or you might be able to take over at year 27. So all that depends. That is a qualified assumption, and that's what most folks are hoping to get.
Yeah.
And that is what I sort of refer to as the unicorn of lending.
The unicorn. Because this whole entire time, right, when we as attorneys are drafting our legal documents and we're talking about how the staying spouse has to apply for refinance, they've got 2 years. What I'm actually talking about is they need to do a qualified assumption because they're trying to assume the mortgage, get the husband's name off. So, and then the debt is all in like my name now. And that's this qualified assumption is actually called the unicorn of mortgages. Like, I don't, why? Because
it's so rare.
Okay.
It seldom works. The qualified assumption to actually assume a loan, not refinance it into your name, which is what most people do, but assume the loan at the current interest rate is really rare. First of all,
okay.
yeah.
Wait, hold on. The qualified assumption and the refinance are two different beasts.
They're two separate things, two separate processes. Absolutely.
That's why you're here. Okay, so the qualified assumption. Okay, I get it now. So you're saying I'm basically assuming the loan at this great, fantastic 2% interest rate. But that's hard to do, you're saying.
It is really hard to do. It's not impossible. Yeah. It's generally allowed for government-backed loans, such as VA for a veteran, or FHA, or USDA, which is mostly farmland. So if they fall within those government-backed types of loans, which make up about 18% of all the loans out there, then generally they will qualify for an assumption, assuming that they can show financially that they also qualify for that process.
Oh man, that's why it's tough then, huh?
It is really tough. In addition, the majority of the loans will be conventional loans, which generally do not qualify for an assumption
Yeah.
unless the lender makes an exception. And there are so many hoops to jump through.
Okay.
First of all, it's going to take about 6 months on average to complete the process,
Wow.
which is a lot longer than a refinance or a purchase, which are generally 30 days or a month.
Okay.
In addition to that, there isn't someone on the other side who's really managing this process. So the client himself or herself is going to have to be really organized, really persistent, be the one that always checks in and finds out what is the next step, by when, who's going to do it, what needs to be done. They also have to make sure they qualify financially, which is another big step. And so even if they were to keep the home through or the loan through an assumption, the financial planning for a divorce still is really, really important.
Okay.
Because if they're not set up correctly, let's say their loan is assumable, but they don't qualify financially, it's really useless.
Okay.
So the financial piece is still really important. In addition to that, there has been a lot of bait and switch action acts that have been we've seen in the mortgage industry that I really want to warn clients against. So what happens is a lender will say to a client, yes, this loan is assumable. Here's an assumption package. Go ahead and start out the process. They fill it out. They generally have to pay a fee. And what I've been hearing has been around $1,200 plus. Generally, there is an appraisal that has to be done. So the cost goes to about $2,000, between $1,000 and $2,000. And they go through this long process and they're told, yes, your loan is assumable. It's going to take a while. And they proceed thinking that, okay, I'm going to be set. I'm going to be able to keep this loan at a 3% interest rate. Then they get their first loan estimate. And when they look at it, the interest rate is not 3%, but it's maybe 5.5%. And they call up the lender and they say, what happened? Oh, well, actually, that's not a rate we can offer you. But look, we're offering you this rate with these costs. So it's really a bait and switch that happens that is so unethical. And I'm really waiting to see what the regulators are going to do, how they're going to stop this from happening. It doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens often enough where in all this time that I've been helping clients and I'm here as a resource, I haven't seen a single individual being able to successfully assume a loan at the interest rate that they originally had.
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, so what can we do next? Because I didn't meet the qualified assumption. What can we do next?
Yes. So then you, as the staying spouse, will have a couple of options. One is go forward with the legal assumption. That is when both spouses stay on the same loan. And so then the question becomes, well, what about the departing spouse? The departing spouse is going to want to go buy his or her new place, and they don't want to be financially obligated on this loan for the marital home, right? And that comes up a lot, I'm sure. There are ways in which, first of all, the departing spouse can exclude or omit the current mortgage from their debt to income ratio. And that's done a number of ways. The easiest way and the most common way is if in the divorce documents, the settlement agreement or the CR2A, it is stated very clearly that the staying spouse.
I'll pause you for 1 second right there. CR2A is a common term in divorce world that we call a CR2A settlement agreement, which is basically saying we have come to an agreement and this is what the agreement is. And the CR2A is essentially a way like this is a contract. This is our settlement contract. So people, and then they were bound by it. So people aren't changing their minds afterwards. And a lot of times it happens after mediation, where after mediation, the mediator will prepare a CR2A settlement agreement, basically capturing what the parties agree to. And then one of the attorneys assigned to draft the final orders and the other attorney will present. So that's what we're talking about right now when we're saying, a CR2A or CR2A settlement agreement, or CR2A for short, or settlement agreement, we'll talk about myself, Lani Akiona, is going to go stay in the home, and husband Joe Schmo wants to get his own place. Okay, so you're saying that then the settlement agreement can say Mr. Joe can then what?
Thank you for clarifying that. I sometimes forget that it is those are some specific legal terms, so I appreciate that. Yes, if in one of the divorce documents, in the final divorce decree, it specifically stated that the staying spouse gets the marital home and is 100% responsible for all the costs associated with that home, including the mortgage, which is the principal, the interest, the taxes, the insurance, the HOA, if one is applicable, all the utilities, all of those costs. In that case, most lenders will omit the current mortgage from the departing spouse's debt to income ratio, and thus the departing spouse, so Joe in this case, to be able to go and qualify for a new loan based on his complete financial profile, not including this loan that Lani is keeping.
Okay, well, so let me ask you this, Mihaela. So what if my divorce documents just say that I, Lani, am responsible for the mortgage on this place, but it doesn't have the language concerning the insurance, the taxes, HOAs? Is my husband still okay to get his own loan, or do I have to have all of those 4 or 5 things?
Probably he will be okay. However, to give the departing spouse a great chance where an underwriter is not going to question it, it is safer and recommended that is spelled out very clearly that the staying spouse is going to be responsible for all of these costs.
Okay.
So that there's no issue. And what happens if there are back taxes on the property?
Yeah.
Then that might become an issue for the departing spouse. So if you can really clearly state who is financially responsible, then it gives that departing spouse less hurdles to jump through.
Wow, that's so interesting, because if on the other side I was representing Joe in my head, and I'm looking at like Mary's attorney, doing these documents, I would have to say, hey, I want it to I don't want it to just say Mary is going to take over the residence at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Robin Hood Lane, and then that's it. I want to make sure that I've putting in all these other languages, that not only is Mary gonna take over the residence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Robin Hood Lane, but she's going to pay the mortgage for that residence. She's going to pay the taxes. She's going to pay the property insurance. She's going to pay any HOA dues. So
You got it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
It's all about the details. You have to be very clear, and you as an attorney, I'm sure you deal with this on a daily basis, just like with everything else in the divorce. The more clearly it's spelled out, the easier it's going to be for these folks when they are actually putting these steps into play.
Okay, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. So there is one part of this that is really important, which is what happens if we have a legal assumption, meaning that both spouses stay on the loan, and yes, Joel can go out and get his new mortgage. However, what happens if Lani has a glitch in her bank and she makes a late mortgage payment that's more than 30 days late?
Right.
In that case, Joel's credit is going to be severely impacted by this late payment. Mm-hmm. And so that is the number one concern of divorcing spouses. They don't want to be tied to the actions of their former spouse. And because of that, and I'm sure I would love to hear how you see this and how you address it, but it's probably wise to not have this go on forever, but set a specific deadline. A year, 2 years, 5 years maybe, once the kids enter high school or finish high school, whatever that event in their qualifying event, by which time the staying spouse will actually have to do a refinance and fully remove the departing spouse from that mortgage to protect them. But in the meantime, are there any protections available to Joel? And what I've seen some couples do, and this is especially relevant in cases of collaborative law or mediation, when there is more collaboration between the two sides, is that perhaps they have some kind of a system set up where the staying spouse will prove to the departing spouse by an agreed upon date of the month, let's say the 10th of the month, Lani, you have to show Joe that you've made the mortgage payment each month. And then Joe doesn't have to worry about it. Okay, here's proof. And if you fail to show that, then perhaps the second layer of this planning will be that you have set up a joint account with a reserve amount of 1 to 3 or 6 months of mortgage. And Joe can go access that account in cases in which you fail to provide proof that you've made the mortgage or for some reason is not made on time. Joe can access this account and make that payment.
Okay.
And you can have all kinds of caveats set up saying that once there is a late payment, then the sale action has to start. The process has to commence at that point, because obviously we cannot take the risk, or you use the amounts, the funds in that account to set up further enforcement. But those are ways that couples sort of work out an arrangement where the staying spouse is able to keep the current mortgage in case they don't qualify for a refinance or an equity buyout.
So let's talk about the refinance and the equity buyout.
Yes.
So,
yes, I would love to talk about that. And this is a topic that I feel deserves the most time when I'm talking to clients and even sometimes divorce professionals, because frankly, this is not your field. You're not a mortgage professional, and there's no reason for you to know the difference between these two programs. But when you set up an equity buyout, which is when one spouse is buying out the departing spouse's interest in the home, there are two separate types of loans through which you can do that. It's called an equity buyout, but you can structure it as a cash out refinance, or you can structure it as a rate and term refinance.
wow.
And I want to take a minute to explain the difference between the two, in case folks are not familiar with these two types of loans. So a cash out refinance is really what it sounds like, when you are able to refinance a loan and at the same time pull out cash from the equity of that home.
Yeah. So let's pretend that I have to do the equity in my home is $100,000 that I need to pay to my departing spouse. So let's work with that number.
Okay, exactly. So let me explain. Let me pull up some numbers here. All right. So we're dealing with, sorry, my nose just went away, with an equity buyout structure through a cash out refinance. What's important to know about a cash out refinance is that it's going to have generally higher interest rates than a rate and term refinance, on average 0.5%, which can mean the difference between an additional $200 to $500 per month for the borrower, depending on the loan amount and the interest rate.
How much more per month? Did you say $200 to $500 per month?
Yes, that can be the difference between a cash out refinance and a rate and term refinance, because of the higher interest rate.
So that second thing is called what? A rate and term?
Rate and term refinance. I'll explain that next. So
I'm writing this down here.
The cash out refinance and the rate and term refinance.
So the rate and term refinance is so not sexy. I mean, cash buyout, everybody can get that. Rate and term, I'm like, good Lord, can we have something funner to say? Okay, that's just my little.
The rate and term refinance is what we saw a lot during the refinance boom, because this is when folks had these higher interest rates, 4 to 5%, and they're able to get down to a 2.75 or 3.25, somewhere in that range. And so what they've done is really just change the rate,
and the term,
meaning going from a 5-6% to a 3%, and then the term, meaning that, let's say that they had a 30-year loan, but they were 20 years in and they only had 10 years left. Well, when they've set up their new loan, they got to choose. They want a 10-year term, a 20-year term, a 30-year term. So you change the rate and you change the term, but you don't get any cash out other than incidentals up to $2,000, which they could get with the rate and term refinance. Versus a cash out refinance, you change the rate, you change the term, and then you can access up to 80% of the home's equity.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for beautifully explaining that rate and term. The way you explained it helped it click in my head. So thank you so much. Okay,
And
so
here's the part that's going to make that rate and term really stand out in your mind and make it sexy, as you said, is with, just like I said, the cash out refinance, you can access up to 80% of the equity in a home. With the rate and term, Lani, you can access up to 95% of the equity in a home.
oh,
which is
that's
huge. Yes, when it comes to buying out your spouse, if you only have $100,000 worth of equity in the home, and let's just say that your home is worth 500,000,
okay.
right?
Okay.
And you have your equity, so you owe 400,000 on it, so your equity is 100,000, and you have to pay out your spouse half of that, which would be 50,000.
Yeah.
Well, if you had a cash out refinance, you couldn't pull out the 50,000 needed when your loan was already at 80% of loan to value ratio. You're already at that cap of 80%, so you're done.
I'm done.
If you only had the cash out as an option, you could not pull out any equity from the house. And unless you had other assets that you could use to buy your departing spouse's share, then you may not have an option and you may be forced to sell.
Wow.
But if you were able to qualify for a rate and term refinance, then you could easily go up to the 95% mark and get out the 50,000 that you need to pay off your spouse.
So let me ask you this. Do you see more people are qualified to do the rate and term as opposed to the cash out refinance?
That's a really good question. So this is one instance that I've seen over and over before I got into this line of work. And let me just give you an example of I'll call them Jane and Joe, just for
let's call them Jane and Judy, so we can be fair to the
Jane and Judy.
Can be inclusive to
yes. So Jane and Judy, they worked really hard to equally and equitably divide their assets.
Okay.
And part of this division, they thought they were both being fair, and they were.
Yeah.
Part of this included a cash out, an equity buyout with a cash out that Jane had to pull out of the house to give Judy the funds so that Judy could go buy her own place. And everybody counted on this, and Judy was really set on where she was going to live, to be closer to her job. Everything was lined up. But then when Judy went and talked to a mortgage professional who was not someone that was really specialized in divorce. Do I qualify for a cash out refinance? Oh, yes, you do. They went through the financials. Yes, you'll be fine. No one ever took the time to discuss the limits with her and actually do the planning.
Yeah.
So then they figured out, well, what's fair? Oh, 6 months is fair for you to come up with this cash, right?
Right.
So they went through
6 months, right?
Yeah, which is pretty typical from what I've seen. They go through the motion, divorce is finalized. Jane goes to apply for a refinance. Of course, she's approved, but then she finds out that the max that she's able to take out through the cash out refinance is insufficient for Judy to be able to actually get a home. So now what does she do? She basically can rescind the loan and keep her regular rate, and maybe sell assets if that's even an option, or else Jane might have to sell that property, even though that wasn't in her plan at all, to be in a position where she no longer had her comfortable, safe place.
I just feel screwed. I just got screwed over. I'm Jane right now. I just got screwed over. What the heck? What the heck?
Because the planning wasn't there, and no one explained, and no one even took the time to see if it was possible to help them get this structured as a rate and term refinance, which would have solved all their problems. And it would have been.
This is why people have to come to you, because she can help you walk through this and
set it up correctly. Yes.
Holy smokes. This is and I excuse me, because like I jump all over the place sometimes, but I think what's important to know is not only you looking at these different options for people, walking them through it, seeing can you qualify, but the big piece of you is that financial planning, where you had mentioned something about, okay, well, let's structure things in terms of maybe spousal maintenance or something else where we can bump up your income, right? Can you talk us through that? Because I know I'm not explaining it well.
Yes, absolutely. So just to tie in the prior conversation really quick, for Jane to have been able to qualify for the rate and term refinance, there's a number of criteria that had to be met. But the one preventable piece of that is that this equity buyout had to be specifically addressed in a very very strict way in the divorce documents. It had to be addressed independently, either in the homestead section or as its own paragraph. And if that wasn't there, it would have been really hard for them to structure this as a rate and term refinance. They both had to be untitled for 12 months. So there's a number of things that had to have happened to get Jane to qualify to structure it as a rate and term. So exactly what you said, Lani, the advanced planning is crucial in this case.
Well, so like what has to go on the divorce document so the staying spouse can qualify for the rate and term refinance?
It has to be addressed specifically independently of any other asset division, either in the homestead section or in the asset division section. And it has to say that Lani or Jane is going to be keeping the real property at this address, and they're going to buy out their spouse or the other owner. And here are the terms, and this is how it's going to happen. And there's a lot more things that go into that. For example, if you set up as a percentage instead of as a dollar amount, that may save the couple from having to renegotiate the price later, because as you know, Lani, property prices will go up and down. And so when that lender has to do their own appraisal, if they had set up the division as a percentage, let's say 50% or 40% that goes to the departing spouse, even if that value goes up and down slightly, it's not going to change in how much the departing spouse gets. But if you set it up as a dollar amount, and now all of a sudden the property is worth a lot less, well, how is the staying spouse going to come up with the additional funds? Because that amount changes. So there's all these little details that I can work with the couple and the divorce team in helping them set this up. So whenever I see that there's an issue and how this is structured, then I will maybe send a message and work with the team. Ultimately, I don't give legal advice. I stay in my lane, but I am a resource for the divorce attorney and for the couple to reach a resolution. And so whenever I see issues that might become problems down the road, I then sort of interject and say, hey, can we take a look at this? Is there a different way to maybe structure this or explain it so that these clients won't have an issue down the line? Because again, Lani, you're not expected to be a mortgage professional.
Right.
That's not, you do enough as it is. This is not something that you need to be an expert in, but this is why you have people like me who can help with that part and help with the planning and help make sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you said in terms of just even instead of using a dollar amount, right? Instead of saying 50,000, say 50% of the home's equity, right? Dollar amount. And I think, we as attorneys, we're so used to saying the dollar amount because traditionally what happened was that the home's equity would increase in value. And we're worried if we say a percentage that then that departing spouse then gets more as that home's equity increases. But on the flip side, what if the home, it's always at risk because what if the home equity goes down and now you can't.
Absolutely. And it's going to depend. You're absolutely right. It's on a case by case basis.
Okay.
It depends on what's happening with the house. It depends on what's happening with the market. And I think what's important to clarify is that that's an option.
Yeah.
Where in some cases that might make a big difference, where if the couple is really set on a specific dollar amount for specific reasons, then for sure we're going to go with that dollar amount.
Right.
But
and and just really quickly, it could also depend on just in terms of like what the term we're talking about for the refinance, whether it's like 6 years or 5 years. So I love how in family law, the answer is always, it depends. It applies here too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, we are one piece of the puzzle. We don't make the rules. We work with you, with the divorce team, with the divorce attorney. to make sure that the advice that we give, the planning that we give actually helps the process. And it's not a stickler that is going to slow down your efforts towards a resolution.
Wow.
Yeah.
So my next question was, and I just forgot it because
It was about support income.
yeah, because you're saying so many good things. Okay, so now you're walking me through the process of, hey, Lani, this is how we can do your income so you can, so you're helping me to qualify for the rate and term refinance. Is that what we're doing?
Just seeing what your options were, right? So one of the biggest planning portions when it comes to divorcing spouses is the support piece, because your W-2 job is going to be, your income is what it is, your self-employment, it is what it is, and we don't mess with it. We wouldn't want to be meddling into mortgage fraud in any way, right? So your income is what it is. Child support is based on a financial analysis. That's not something that you can change, although the wording on the child support award in the documents, that can make a difference. And if we have time, we can go into that. But the one piece of income that is sort of negotiable and adjustable, it's going to be the support income, the spousal support income. And that is because your income, first of all, has to be awarded for a long enough period to be deemed qualified income for mortgage purposes. So spousal support. Let me give you an example of one of the first cases that I've ever had that really changed the way that I looked at this planning process. Her name was Alice. She was a single mom, had young kids at home. She worked really hard to win the home and the divorce, because she wanted to keep her young kids in the home, not have to move them. And she knew that she needed additional income, so she worked really hard to get spousal support for 36 months at a really good amount. And then she went out and got a part-time job, and then she had 6 months to refinance the house into her name.
Wow.
Okay, all that looked great. What she went through the process, and then she found out that for the spousal support to be allowed for as qualifying income, it had to be, first of all, for conventional loans, be received for 6 months before it's being qualified. And then it has to continue for another 36 months, which means at a minimum, Alice needed 42 months of support income to be able to use this really important stream of income for qualifying purposes, or else we had to disregard it, which is what happened in this case.
Oh, no.
And I remember that phone call where I had to explain to her that there is no way that this will happen within 6 months, because she didn't have the required receipt period. And once she established that, then she didn't have the additional 36 months, because her entire support was only 36 months and she needed a minimum of 42 months.
And that's just standard across the board, like 42 months, 6. Oh my gosh.
For FHA loans, which are the government backed loans, you can do 3 months proof of receipt and 36 months of continuance. So that's a minimum of 39 months.
Whoa.
But we try to stay away from FHA loans whenever possible, because they are more expensive. They have an upfront funding fee, and then also a required private mortgage insurance. So it makes the loan more expensive for the client. Whenever possible, we try to stay away from FHA loans.
Okay.
So it's always better to have, for a refinance, a minimum of 42 months. Really, 43 months is what you want, because you want to have a month of cushion in case anything happens. And then, Lani, if for clients who need to purchase the property, we need an even longer time period, because we need a few months as a cushion for the client to go out and start shopping for a property, put in offers, negotiate the offers, have the offer accepted, go on their contract, and then make sure that loan closes. So if we only give them 42 months, that means that as soon as the 6 months is done, they need to be that loan ready to close. And it's really hard to time it when they're going out in what is turning out to be a market that's heating up again, where we're seeing multiple offers again. Yeah. And clients need that additional time to be able to shop and find the right place before they make an offer.
So just to get this clear, so we're going back to the Alice situation. So Alice needed to show that she had the spousal support income for 6 months, and then she was going to get it for another 36 months on top of that.
You got it. Minimum of 42 months. Assuming there's no glitches anywhere, assuming that the credit was perfect and didn't need it to be upgraded, assuming that everything worked out perfectly, the minimum amount she needed was 42 months for her to be able to use her support income to qualify for that refinance.
So, okay, so what happened to her? Because since she didn't meet that.
Yes, even though she had a part-time job,
what happened?
again, she needed to have a longer term period, and she didn't meet that period. So she unfortunately had to sell.
Oh,
She tried to reopen to have her basically agreement modified to have additional time, but the spouse was not open to that. And she was forced to sell, and she was devastated because she spent so much money on this process, thinking that she's going to keep the home for the kids, and she wasn't able to. And it was a really heartbreaking conversation, one that stays with me now years later.
yeah, because because in your, I mean, obviously she came to you after the fact, and in your head, you can't help but think, oh, I so wish you saw me beforehand. We could have prevented.
Yes.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Yeah, tough stories, tough story. Oh my gosh, that's why even more so it's so important that people go and see you to plan so they don't get stuck like poor Alice did.
Yeah. Let me give you a success story though. So
Yes, please. It's bad now.
All right, I'm going to call this client Nick, Nikolai. So Nikolai was also a single dad, and he had income, but he was mostly a stay-at-home dad.
Okay.
And they were living in the same house. They did have an investment property that they sold, so there was a significant amount of assets that came through that he was going to receive as a settlement. But for now, they're living in the house. He was going to get both spousal support and child support. But again, remember that 6 month rule, needing to establish proof of receipt. Well, during this time,
again, you said the 6 months rule needing to establish before receipt.
Proof of receipt. So for the spousal support and child support to be deemed qualified income for mortgage purposes, the receiving spouse needs to show proof of receipt for 6 months.
Proof of receipt for 6 months.
That's called the 636 rule. And it has to do with consistency and stability standards in the lending industry. But to really simplify it is that we need to show that the receiving spouse has been regularly and clearly receiving the support income for 6 months and is going to continue for 36 months.
Okay, 636 rule.
You got it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So in this case, Nick, he was going to start receiving spousal support and child support. All of that is going to happen. But for now, they're still living in the house. The divorce was going to be finalized within 30 days. And their relationship was deteriorating day by day to the point where it was becoming really toxic, on the verge of becoming abusive. And he needed to move. And he was the primary parent. He had the kids most of the time. And his options were really limited. He would have to go out and rent. And it was really hard to find a month-to-month place to rent, or even a 6 months. Most places required a year. And he really didn't want to do that, because if he did, his time period of purchasing a place with his support income would have run out, would have been really limited, right? Because he only had the 6 plus 36 plus a few months of cushion to buy something. So if he signed a 1-year contract, even a 6-month contract to rent a place, he would have missed out on the window that he had to purchase the property in his name. And so what to do? I was able to work with his attorney. We brought in an estate planning attorney, someone that I really trust and respect, and a financial planner, which I don't do any of those jobs. And we created a specific type of trust where Nikolai was able to put in a certain amount. In this case was, I believe, 150,000 out of the 300 he was getting from the sale of the home. And we turned that into qualified income. And we were able to work simultaneously with him as he was finalizing his divorce. And his divorce was finalized on the 25th of the month, and he got the keys to his new place on the 28th of the month without having to wait the 6 months.
Wait, what? Wait, you didn't have to wait the 6 months because you guys did this trust?
Yes. It was more advanced. It was more complicated. There were additional costs. He had to pay the attorney. I don't recall. I think it was $1,100, and the divorce attorney had to work with us and be willing to put the specific language again in the divorce decree specifying this trust. We had to make sure the funds were wired directly from the community property into the trust and not sent over to the client, because once the funds were in the client's possession, the client couldn't fund his own trust. It wouldn't work. So there were a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of planning. But in this case, it was so worth it because it didn't escalate the relationship, the issue. It didn't become a domestic violence situation. They were able to get out of the house, get into a property, not pay rent, which is 100% interest, get into a house that they loved, and then everybody walked away happy. And that was huge. And so the planning, that's an example of the planning worked beautifully.
Oh my gosh, that is just, I feel like crying. I feel like crying because I know how hard it is and how much work, and just to kind of hear that kind of success story, it just like, wow, I'm just blown away in a very nerdy sort of divorce financial planning way. It's amazing.
And I believe this attorney was a guest on one of your podcasts earlier.
Oh, I know. Wills and Trust attorney, Kanoa Ulstrom. Yes. You know what? I wouldn't be surprised because he is very, very smart. He's
very smart. Yeah.
LLM in tax.
Yes.
Trust. Yeah. There you go. Well, you guys are just talk about a wonder team between you and him. Oh goodness. Wow. That's just so much information. My mind is just kind of blown away right now. Did we cover gosh, I'm speechless.
We covered a lot. What we haven't talked about is my process, sort of how I put this into how it actually works in a practical way. So if we have a few minutes, I'd love the chance to cover that. So
please
know what to expect.
Yeah. Please tell us about your process.
Sure. Thank you. So a referral will come to me, and generally it comes from a divorce professional, although I do have referrals from past clients who have friends who are not going through a divorce, and they call me and say, can you do the same thing you've done for me, for my friend or for my cousin? And I absolutely love to help. Let's say referral comes to me, we set up an initial consultation that takes a little bit of time. It takes a good 45 minutes to an hour. And during that time, I talk about their goals, just like I mentioned earlier. If this was a perfect world, what would you like to see happen? Because their goals really matter. I can see 5 different options for them, but if they only want, this other option, well, I can tell them ahead of time, I'm really sorry, Lani, but that's not really within the options available to you. Can we reassess? But if it's one of the options that we can work, then we'll focus on that. So their goals are really important. It's not about what I want to do, what I think it's doable, but what will make my client happy. And within that conversation, I also talk about budget. Because yes, I can qualify a client for a mortgage, for a refinance or a purchase at whatever purchase point or price, but that might mean that they'll have to eat ramen for the next year or 5 years, and that's not really doable.
Not either. I know.
The budget is really important. So find out their goals, find out their budget. Then I go in through and do a full analysis, and I gather their whole financial profile, information about their divorce proceedings. What type of divorce proceeding is that? Is it litigation? Is it mediation? Is it collaborative? Find out who their divorce team is, what their deadlines are, where they are in the process. And then I create a very detailed report and letter that goes along with it. And this is what's different about me, because having been an attorney, I bring that really analytical side and also educational side to my clients. I love being able to explain these concepts to them, educate them, and be a resource. And the nice thing is that I don't charge. There's no cost. So the clients feel really at ease being able to ask me questions about, explain to me what a rate and term refinance is. How is it different than a cash out? How can we do it? And not feel that they are taking up the attorney's time that could have been better used on something that's more important to their case. So
Plus,
they
I,
feel,
I can't explain it like how you do. I'm not smart like you.
you're smart. Yeah, but you're not an expert in mortgages, which again, you don't need to be.
You are.
So I'm able to create this report in this letter. I send it to them, and it's very detailed. And then we have a follow-up session where I actually share my screen and I go through this report in detail. And we cover a lot of things. We covered what happens to your escrow account when you refinance, because there's funds in there. Where do those funds go? What happens if you move out? Do you need to change your home equity? Your homeowner's insurance policy, and why? We talk about what is the available equity. We touch on capital gains. I cannot give legal advice, but I can explain the basics of it and if that will be an issue for them. And then I go through the options as I see them. And then once we identify a specific plan of action, then we sort of dial in those figures. I present that report to their divorce team, whether that's just their attorney or their mediator or their certified divorce financial analyst, who I work with a lot on collaborative divorces. And then I sort of am in the background as a resource, answering questions along the way until we get to that finish line.
Okay.
And the way that I explain, as far as, one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, well, what do you charge? I don't charge for any of this. If there is a mortgage component that makes sense to the client, that really fits within their plan and is beneficial, then I would just ask they consider working with my company or my brokerage, but there's no obligation for them to do that.
Oh my goodness.
As you know, Lani, I've kept my attorney license, and I did it for really to put my clients at ease, that I am their advocate when it comes to this lending planning process, that I'm going to put their needs first. And I'm never looking to make a profit.
Yeah.
Instead of helping them find a solution. And I think they see that once they start talking to me, it builds trust pretty quickly. And I'm happy to be able to do that and to be this neutral, calm voice through this process, because dealing with the marital home or dealing with housing after divorce can be really hard and emotional and confusing.
Oh, definitely. It is. And just, if I was a client going, and if I was a client going through a divorce, if I was going through a divorce, I would feel so good and so safe to have a resource like you to kind of help me figure out these different financial pieces, because it's scary, and it's something that we as lay people and even as divorce attorneys, we don't understand the intricacies behind all of this. And like you said, like a regular, why is it that the regular lenders don't know about these different types of considerations? Just because.
Yeah, it's just like you being a divorce attorney. This is your focus. This is your specialty.
This is my lane.
This is what you train exactly,
Trained.
and this is what I've dedicated my career to. And I am. Last weekend, I was at a family law training, not because I need to, but because I want to, because I want to better my craft and give better service to my clients, really understand this process more. I focus on this. I'm a specialist when it comes to divorce mortgage planning and lending. So you will have really competent, really caring lenders out there who have been doing this for 20, 30 years, who are fantastic, but they may not know all these little details, or how to look at a divorce decree and know what language needs to be in there,
right,
and how the wording will make a difference. And they may not have the time that I do to be able to dedicate an average 4 hours working with the client before they actually become a lending client.
Wow.
Through this process, which is significant, and it's pro bono.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Mihaella, for being on this podcast and just excuse me, for just kind of blowing my mind on just the nuances and the intricacies and just the the specialized knowledge you need to have in terms of divorce lending and divorce refinancing. And if people, and your company is called TrueLendingCo.com. So if you folks want to go ahead and look her up, go to True Lending, True, TRUE, Lending, Co.com. And go ahead, and you've got to work. If you're going through a divorce, you're thinking about refinancing, you're trying to figure out, how can I structure my divorce settlement so I can maybe go and buy a property? You've got to go see Mihaella at TrueLendingCo.com. Mihaella, anything else that that I missed or something that you want to say in these closing moments?
I just want to thank you so much for giving this subject the attention that I feel it deserves. For most of us, for most Americans, the biggest asset that we have is our home. And the importance of this planning is, I feel, it's so huge, and it makes such an impact for these clients having what I call a successful divorce, because it's not just about a piece of paper, as I'm sure you know and you understand. It's about the parenting plan working. It's about everything else, the communication, but also each of these individuals walking away and feeling like they are set up for the next chapter in their lives. And if I can help bring this to light to the divorce professionals and to folks out there in general, it is my pleasure, my privilege. Thank you so much for having me. Again, yes, just like you said, the company is called True Lending Co., which stands for True Lending Company. We're in Edmonds. We can cover all of Washington, California, also Colorado and North Carolina when it comes to any certified divorce lending planning. So please reach out. It's all free, it's all confidential, and we'd love to help out.
There you go. Washington, California, Colorado, and North Carolina. And Mihaella, we'd love to have you come back on the Akiona Law Podcast again and share with us your knowledge and your expertise in divorce lending.
It'll be my pleasure. Thank you, Lani, for doing this and educating the public. It's such a great service that you're providing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for just sharing your knowledge and your wisdom in this complicated area, but I just love how you explained it, and you just kind of broke it down where even I, who I say, I became a lawyer because I'm not good at math, even I could understand. So thank you so much again. And
my pleasure. It was really fun. Thank you.
And just thank you all out there, and tune in next time for the next episode of Akiona Law Podcast, wherein we talk about anything and everything that intersects in the areas of family law, divorce, and collaborative divorce. I'm Lani Akiona. Until next time, be well.
The information in this podcast is general advice only and should not in any respect be relied on as specific legal advice.